Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Johnny Campbell and welcome to the July 8th edition of the Shortlist. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you've been enjoying the last 11 or so episodes that we put out there. We're really enjoying getting stuck into season 2 here on the Shortlist. And as always, I want to encourage anyone listening live to please join in the comments. We've got a great guest today. We've got a fantastic topic I think is going to interest all of you and engage you. So we'd like to see your questions, your comments, your thoughts on LinkedIn or YouTube. We're going to take those live. Myself and our guest will take those out and try and address and answer them. We're going to get your thoughts, your examples on this as well. As ever, if you want to check out our upcoming lineup on the Shortlist, or you'd like to basically check out some of our previous episodes, you can do so at socialtalent.com/the shortlist, where you'll get a preview of what's coming over the coming weeks. But again, as I said, you can access any of our prior episodes for free and watch the videos or listen to the shows as well. So that brings me to today's episode. We're going to talk about adaptability. We want to talk about how, particularly out of COVID and the pandemic, we've all learned that adaptability is an essential survival skill. At least I think it is. And I'm hoping we can have a good discussion on this with our guest today. Our guest today has been a friend of mine for some time. She's currently the head of talent acquisition for Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Adobe. Prior to that, she ran global TA for King Games. Becks Clarke is joining us live from the UK today. And I'm going to hand over to Becks to kind of give you a bit more context as to what makes her passionate, what she does, and a little bit more about the company she works for. Becks, over to you.
Thank you, Johnny, and thank you for the invite to join you this afternoon. Much appreciated. Always enjoy our conversations. So a little bit of background about me. I'm currently leading the TA organisation for EMEA for Adobe, as Johnny alluded to. So we're very much about driving the world through digital experiences. So very topical at this point in time. I've been in the business just over 6 months, so had a very interesting journey of kind of 3 months of BAU and then thrown into our COVID pandemic world. So definitely needed to be adaptable through that time. Interesting topic for me. So, the ability to be adaptable in terms of how it drives you as an individual, what it means within the organizations you're in, has huge impact. So really, really interesting discussion and looking forward to talking, Johnny.
I want to explore adaptability both in the personal sense. I'm keen to get your experience of how you have become more adaptable if you have as a result of the pandemic, maybe in a personal way, because I'm going to share some insights. Even if you don't want to hear them, Bex, I'm going to share them with you about I've learned things about myself and how I've had to be less rigid over the last 3-4 months in certain things. But I want to talk about that then and take the bigger conversation into the workplace. We work in the world of talent. I want to talk about what that means for organizations and the importance or lack of importance of adaptability, where it does rank, where it should rank, where it comes from as well in particular. So let's dive into those after we jump into a couple of, I think, really relevant articles from the news this week. And ask Niall to get on with this week's news. We might be cheating when we say the news this week. You were presented with a news article to research, and instead you found yourself reading what was a bit of an essay from Peter Skoblik in Harvard Business Review. But I'd encourage anyone listening or watching this to check this out. Learning from the Future. This is a really interesting article. I'll sum it up and get your opinion on it. But essentially, Peter was talking about, how most organizations really weren't prepared for this particular crisis. And it's unlikely that we'll be prepared for the next crisis because these kind of things are black swans and you just generally don't have a frame of reference to deal with it. And he gives an example, a really good example, a long, detailed example of an organization who have basically built systemic planning into the organization, planning for future crazy scenarios to try and learn from the future, as he puts it, to try and figure out what could happen in multiple different scenarios so that if any of those happen, or if a combination of bits of those happens, which is perhaps more likely, they have kind of flex their muscles, their brain muscles, to think about different scenarios and to react well to those. So Bex, I'm keen to kind of hear, what are your thoughts about the approach that the author put forward in this article? And what do you think it means for teams?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Johnny. So I think, for me, scenario planning is kind of the crux of what he's talking about, and I think that always makes sense. I think my question is, in reality, how often does that happen, and how do you actually encourage organisations to do more of that? So, certainly my experience has seen businesses that are much more reactive rather than kind of driving that proactive thinking that then is needed when you're looking at scenario planning. I think COVID is an extreme. It's an absolute massive thing. Nobody could have planned for it. It touches kind of everything in a working context, but massive impact on personal lives. And those two things together are just a complete and utter kind of nightmare as a whole piece. So, I think my question is more around how do you encourage and drive businesses to see the benefits in scenario planning and actually carve out the time to do that? And then how do you really create kind of diverse thinking in that scenario planning so that you're not just thinking about the two or three things you think might be likely, but you're actually really kind of reaching and digging deep for more unlikely scenarios in that mix.
What has your experience been like directly in the companies you worked for? I know you only just joined Adobe a few months before the pandemic. Perhaps don't have the same experience there, but even in previous organizations, what was the approach to this kind of planning that you've seen hands-on in the past?
Yeah, I think I've seen a mix in my career, Johnny, over the last 20 years. So, I've worked in organizations that have been much more forward thinking and actually have done this to a degree. I definitely haven't seen any organization that I think has done it amazingly well. So, I've certainly seen businesses, and even within the talent arena, we've done what if scenario planning. So if we want to be this size or we want to grow at this rate, what would that look like? What are the hurdles we're likely to overcome? How do we do that? So I think I've probably seen a mix, but I definitely haven't seen an organization that I think, has absolutely nailed this.
Like I'm part of I'm doing a leadership program this year, right? I went back to school, Becks, right? And I was meant to be in New York last week doing my schooling. That got canned fairly
That's
lively,
a come
right?
down, Johnny, yeah.
Oh, it is, right? So we've been doing this through ESA, the business school in Barcelona. Great business school. Yeah. And, I'm doing this with 31 other CEOs. And every one of them, when we kind of got stuck into COVID, we got on some online seminars and stuff. Every one of them had scenario planned in a very, very similar way, right? And we were no different to kind of go, what are the different scenarios? What if it's a V dip? What if it's a U? What if it's double dip? And they kind of mapped what would they do, and they'd mapped what would their cost plan be, what is their approach to changing the products, etc. And so we all did this planning. It wasn't a moment where someone showed us a slide and then we went back into the planning. We came together and said, what have you been doing? And it turns out we all did pretty much the same planning. And my take is that you scale out to enterprises, it's probably what most businesses did. It happened, we planned, right? As opposed to the real difference here is planning before it happens and planning for things you can't predict. And I like this because, we often go, and this is what experience brings you, right? I talk about hiring somebody who's only got a certain amount of experience in this sector, whether she or he is young or old, doesn't really matter. It's that they're new enough to the role. And people get quite confident after 3 or 4 years, they know everything, right? We know what it's like. But actually experience is going through things several times so that when something comes up, you go, I've dealt with something similar to this before. Here's how it worked out. And here's either what I did right or I did wrong. So I'm going to correct it. And that's generally what experience means, right? You've just seen it before. I think the problem here is that no one experienced something like this. And what they're trying to do here is artificially create an environment where you have seen so many experiences and scenarios in this kind of exercise, this systemic way of approaching planning, that I think the author related, and I like this, to the approach that most universities have begun to adapt. And I saw this in the business school that I'm involved with at the moment, where I use the case study. And what they're trying to do is teach executives through case studies. Idea being, I go through 20 case studies. Okay, I have only my limited experience, but 20 case studies of other people like me has given me at least a framework and heuristics to work with, so that if I see something similar, I can either reference my own experience or one of the case studies as an example. But how would you do this? How would you, did this inspire you to think about, within your team, how would you plan for peaks, falls in hiring, different scenarios happening? Can you see different applications of this? Maybe not in the whole of Adobe, but even within the talent acquisition organization? How would you perhaps implement this?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that you kind of, in a talent role, there is always change, Johnny. So, I've seen change throughout my career. So I think I'm always somebody that has a plan A, B, C, D in my back pocket. And if not, you're able to kind of make one up as you go along without being too crude about it. So, I think for me, as you look forward, and certainly when you talk more about workforce planning and looking at, how do you build those different models, that definitely part and parcel of discussions at the moment. And I think it's, to your point earlier around what are the kind of core themes within that? What are the core skills that come out of that? And how do you shape that? It is certainly part of my thinking at the moment.
I'm going to ask our listeners and audience if they have any examples of organizations they have worked in or known that do this, or other scenarios where they've put in really good planning for wild scenarios and how it's worked out for them. So please jump in on the comments on LinkedIn or YouTube. I'm going to ask Niall, though, in the meantime, to jump into our second article, which is related, but taking a different approach. And this comes from Forbes. So this uses the A word. I'm sorry to bring up the A word, Becks, but they talk about, and Steve Denning, the author, is a big fan of Agile. My God, the guy seems to just live and breathe and write about it. But he talks about how Agile turns risk into opportunity. I think everyone's talking about how do we turn this crisis into an opportunity, right? What are your thoughts on Agile and how it relates to adaptability, which is what our big theme today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you take the word agile in its truest sense, you're talking really about kind of quick and easy or nimble. And I think that for me is really where I focus when we talk about agile. Yes, you can talk about agile methodologies and how that's used within organizations. King's certainly successfully worked with an agile methodology for software development. You can think about its truest sense. How are you? How do you work fast, shift quickly? All of those core things for me are absolutely critical when you start to talk about being agile. And I don't think you can be adaptable without being agile.
We got a good comment here from Aaron Daniels. Good to have you back, Aaron, on the show. Aaron's saying that some companies in the US where he works started hiring additional staff, logistics, and started training management reaction teams for public-facing roles. You've seen companies like this have a dedicated continuity of operations or emergency management dedicated staff. I think that's brilliant. I've heard of those examples. There was an example in the article of on a smaller scale where. In the previous article where you had this article where you had a restaurant who had the same business model for 50 years in this last article. Maybe this might speak to Aaron's point about smaller businesses. I think 100 staff, and they said they had to flip their model instantly. They had not changed their model of how they do food for 50 years, and they had to kind of go back to basics. And one of the things that I liked with this was that it wasn't about how you make profit, how you do these kind of things. They really had to just go back to what is our purpose? Like, what are we actually trying to do? Like, we're here to feed people. Okay, we're here to feed people. How do we do that? And the idea that profits come after you deliver on this. You don't design for profits. You design to drive this purpose. And if you do it well, you're going to get profits. And I think, Agile is perhaps the framework in which you can do that. But maybe, Aaron, that's worth digging out of those articles. Maybe that piece around no matter what size of organization are, if you can go back to your purpose, you can then see how do we still deliver that purpose, and then what do we have to change? And being agile, to your point, I guess by its main definition is doing that. So is agile just though for the large tech companies? In the article they talked about Amazon, or at least parts of Amazon, Google and Apple and those organizations. And you're in a tech organization, have been in tech companies for most of your career, Becks. What's your opinion? Is agile just for tech companies?
No, I think agile can be, certainly the principles and ways of working of agile can be applied across businesses, Johnny. How often that's done, I think, is also a good question. But I certainly think, the kind of principles of it, if you think about, small teams, quick review cycles, those types of things, I definitely think are all structures that would apply or could apply across other organizations. And, we might well see some of that being embedded in different businesses in terms of a different way of kind of working going forward. I think it'd be quite interesting to see, to be fair.
What do you think, if you were to pick the most important parts of the Agile kind of manifesto or concept to adaptability? If you think about an organization's ability to be adaptable, what do you think are the key parts of Agile, and maybe parts of the article mentioned in Forbes, that a company should focus on that allow you therefore to be organizationally adaptable?
I think for me, there are two key things that I would call out. One is kind of having small team sizes, so that you're not trying to move a mountain with 100 people. You've got smaller teams. And then I think the other is speed. So, rather than having very traditional kind of project lengths of months and months, if you're running with kind of 2 or 3 week sprint cycles, you're looking at things in a much shorter time frame, Johnny. And I absolutely hear you in terms of keeping that overall purpose in mind. And I think also, if you think about, if you have delighted employees, you have delighted customers. So I think if you can have your North Star of your overall purpose, your team's fully engaged and working well, then that should follow in terms of customer satisfaction and ultimately profits in there, in a textbook fashion.
Yeah, I think those points around small teams, the North Star of your purpose. If you also give people more autonomy, I think autonomy is one of those drivers. It's been well correlated and documented as being a driver of employee engagement. If you have more autonomy, I think it's an important part of the agility piece. Having small teams working in short sprints, but having a very top-down structure, I think wouldn't get you there. But having, giving people the autonomy to make decisions, to be flexible as well, is really important. And Ross O'Connor's asked a great question here for you, Becks. He's saying, you mentioned the importance of diversity of ideas when scenario planning, which is part of the first article. What does your company do when planning for diversity in the hiring strategy?
Yeah, so and this is a really interesting one that I've debated with a few people recently, because for me, there's kind of, your overall diversity topic. And then there's also, very topically, kind of diversity of thought as well. So, how do you really ensure that your teams have got all of that in the mix, Johnny? I think we are very much looking at diversity as a whole, and as most tech businesses are. It's definitely not an easy challenge, but certainly one that's very, very topical at the moment. But for me, is how do you drive diversity of thought into those? If we're going back to those kind of scenario planning situations, how do you really have a very diverse group of thinking that enables you to go through those conversations? And I think that's that takes it beyond gender and kind of ethnicity. It's really making sure that you've got people from totally different backgrounds, all able to have their voice heard and contribute. Those things for me are kind of top of mind.
We got a comment here from Farouk Zahid, who's an Agile coach, who's just commented that speed with business value is the key of Agile. I think I'd agree with that. I've seen Agile teams focus on the tasks and lose sight of the big goal, the business value, because they're just so obsessed with completion of tasks in 2-week sprints and getting that done. And then they kind of go, we built the stuff. It's like, yeah, but where are we? Back to your point about the North Star.
Exactly. And that for me is why Agile coach is critical in that team makeup as well. Yeah. So Farouk's role is absolutely key to success in those teams, Johnny, in my experience.
I'm going to share with you my maybe trivial nonsense story of adaptability, right, and survival. Survival is a bit of a stretch for this one, but so I'm the type of person, right, who I would consider myself very adaptable, but I have some things that I'm just rigid on, right? I think we all are a little bit like this, right?
We all do. That's human nature. We all do this.
My rigidity is best before dates, or was, right? So if I see a best before date that's expired, or it's today, it goes in the bin. I don't care. It's gone, right? It's trashed, right? And I would have abused my father for his, let's say, casualness when it comes to best before dates. And actually, I do know the science behind it, that there's some best before dates you should watch out for and some you actually don't need to. But I would just religiously put it in the bin. But I found myself during COVID, I don't know if anyone else out there has similar stories of things that they held dear, but they had to drop during COVID. We had a once a week shop, and you didn't go to the store unless you really needed to, right? Back in peak COVID for us, which was maybe April. So if you ran out of stuff, or it was particularly it had expired its best before date, you kind of had to question, well, do I go hungry or do I eat this? And I started sniffing food, and I started examining food. And
you sound like my mom.
Well, Well, this is the thing, because I talked about this with several people, right? Because we kind of go, I think our parents' generation grew up in a world where, food was more scarce, and therefore you did these things. And we had a mini view of that, right? Coming from an affluent society where we're lucky enough we don't have to do that. For a while, we really did. I actually found it quite liberating, because it did change my view, which is I have a lifelong view on best before dates. Now I'm like, oh, that's cool. It's fine. It's only a couple of days. Let's have a look at the bread. There's no mold. Smells all right. Let's do it. Or anything in the cupboard is pretty fresh, right? So it got me thinking about, that being adaptable, literally is an essential survival skill. If you're hung up on best before dates and you face an environment where you cannot go to the store, you cannot get food, you kind of do need to be adaptable in that perspective to survive. Anything you kind of changed your mind on that you were maybe more rigid on during the last 4 months?
Oh, that's a really good question. You needed to prep me on that one.
I didn't prep you for that one. I'm keen to see maybe if our audience have any that they've things that you held dear you've given up on.
From the audience while I quickly think. It's
that's all right. We'll see what our audience have to maybe jump in on that, right? But it got me thinking about people who just won't, right? Because I know there's people out there who don't think like that, who just go, no, this is my way, and that's the end of it. And maybe even in a crisis, they still think that. We have an issue, and I won't go into it today. I'll just mention it, but I won't ask you to talk about it because it's a whole other topic. Masks, right? I'm just not wearing the mask. That's the end of it, right? Type issue. Where people are just really rigid. And I think, I've been kind of researching this topic for the last number of years, and I know you have as well. It's one you're passionate about, Becks, which is adaptability as a skill of an employee, as a critical skill, not just as a nice to have on a tick box. I remember 3 years ago, I was at Talent Connect, LinkedIn's conference, and I saw a fabulous talk by Jennifer Carpenter, who at the time was running global talent acquisition for Accenture. And she spoke about how Accenture, in their chase, their race, I should say, race or chase to try and make sure they had all of the new skills. Because I'm asked, because we're a skills platform all the time, what are the emerging skills? What are the future skills? And people are asking to be ready to try and hire them or grow them, And Jennifer's story from Accenture, and this is 3 years ago, was quite progressive at the time. She was saying Accenture had moved over a decade from hiring for IQ, smart people, to hiring for EQ, people who are more able to be interpersonal, relate to people, to what they called LQ, or the learning quotient. And LQ is adaptability, right? They kind of said, we don't know what the next generation of skills will be, but we do know that they're changing faster than ever. New roles are being created. The kind of half-life of a skill is shortening. So therefore, their solution is to hire people who are adaptable. And this is on an organization of 700,000 people or whatever they employ, which is insane, right? What are your thoughts on that, first of all? And second of all, how do you assess for that? Like, it's all very well to say if you agree that's important, but how the hell do you figure out if someone's adaptable?
Yeah, no, a good question. And I think, first, my kind of debate I've had myself and certainly with a couple of people in the last few days is adaptability in itself a skill? And I don't think it is. I think there are a number of things that go into making somebody adaptable. So, you've mentioned a couple in there. I think learning is absolutely key. I actually think it's a blend of both mindset and action, Johnny. So it's not one thing. So I think you've got learning. I think you've got proactive nature in there. So somebody that has really a kind of driven mindset in that mix. Somebody that's happy to embrace learning and learn from their mistakes. Somebody that's prepared to take a risk, I think, is also important in that mix. Somebody that can see a bigger picture. So when we talked about purpose, ultimately know what you're striving for in all of that. Resilience is huge for adaptability. I see that's kind of come in from one of our audience as well, but resilience is a massive piece for me in terms of adaptability, as is also, I think, being able to stay calm. I think that's a really critical part of it too. So I actually think there are a number of things that go into making up being adaptable. And then, your question is, how do you tease that out of your selection process, and how do you look at those different facets through whatever assessment you're taking your candidates or your employees through, Johnny?
Yeah, we've got Ross O'Connor commenting there. I believe today's dynamic complexity, rapid advancement of technology, and increased uncertainty leads to a need for people who are happy with change. Today, being really skilled in one area may actually be a threat to advancement. I think it's a good point here. You mentioned adaptability, resilience. You mentioned growth mindset. Like, can you teach somebody a growth mindset? What do you think?
Oh, that's a great question. Jury's out for me. I think some of that, I think you can hone a growth mindset, and I think you can be very conscious about holding a growth mindset, but I'm not sure if you can out and out teach it, is my view in that piece. But I think mindset is a massive one, and I think you develop that through your career as well. So for me, there's a real kind of if you think about human nature, doesn't embrace change. Your immediate response, human beings don't like change inherently, so your immediate response is a negative one. So how have you developed, how have you kind of trained yourself to work through that quickly, and then have the right mindset going forward?
Do you think there's a bit of a problem in that, I find myself doing it right now. We talk about what the talent has to have. She has to have a growth mindset. She has to have this, and she has to have this, and can she be trained? Whereas that kind of ignores the environment in which you put the talent into, right? So, you mentioned resilience being really important, which John Halpin has also mentioned. The baseline of resilience is adaptability, right? In the comments. But if I'm resilient, it's really important, because I think, to be adaptable, you have to be prepared to change and try new things, which means you're going to fail a lot, right?
Yeah.
I think that's where the resilience comes from, because you're gonna inevitably fail, because it's not safe, right? You have to take risks. But if you're in an organizational culture that doesn't encourage risk, reward it, in fact, it depromotes it, that means that you can have a growth mindset, you can be resilient, but you work in an organization where it's not safe to take risks. You are not going to display adaptability. You're not going to embrace adaptability if the organizational structure doesn't embrace it. The leadership, the whole environment, the culture doesn't have it. Like, how much of, what's the balance, do you think, between what the individual has to bring and the organization has to bring to the table?
Yeah, I think you need a mix in there. I think, you can never thrive if you're not in the right environment. So, there's lots of discussion at the moment about kind of psychological safety, and do people feel safe in their organizations to take risk? And I think if you don't have that, it makes it incredibly hard. So, for me, I think there is a blend of both of those things, Johnny, just like there is in terms of mindset and action when you talk about adaptability overall.
Yeah, because I know even Steve McClelland from IKEA has commented around, there's a much larger demand for people who can adapt in the role and work with the businesses to be reactive to outside factors. But it's a hard skill to recruit for. And this, again, I think it points to the idea that we just need to hire people with the skill and we'll be fine. I remember, I had a similar scenario when I was working with a client. I won't mention them, several years ago, and they wanted to hire they wanted to become more tech oriented, right? They were selling a how can I say this without revealing them? They were selling a high value good, and they had been much more traditional in their channel to market through traditional retail, and they saw their whole industry moving to digital, but the culture of the organization wasn't digital. Their head office had individual offices, like floors and floors of individual offices, beautiful offices, and very, very expensive cafeteria and all this kind of stuff, like treating everyone fantastically. And they're like, we need tech people. So we need to be a more tech-oriented business to deal with e-commerce. So their solution was, let's hire loads of young people who get tech. And it just failed, because I worked with the recruiting team, and they were just so frustrated, because they're kind of going, this doesn't work. We hire these people, they're awesome, from all these digital businesses. They come in and go, I don't want to work here. This business is just not what I'm all about. And they kept just losing them, right? So I think it is that balance between, you can hire for a skill, but you need to make sure, you're purchasing the right seeds. You need a fertile soil for the seeds to grow. Buying the right seed or finding the right seed is only half of the equation, I think.
Totally. And if your culture isn't ready for that, and your culture actively kind of knocks that, Johnny, then those people coming in are never going to be successful. I've definitely seen that through my career. I had one actual standout example, and again, I clearly won't name the organisation, but we were really aggressively hiring for people with great change capability. And literally 3 months in, and this person is just desperately struggling, and it wasn't the right match, and that was all around, just a lack of openness to, say one thing, but actually the culture dictated something else, so it would never have worked.
Yeah, it's kind of too often when someone doesn't work out, it's they didn't work out, as opposed to going, we hired the right person, but not for the type of organization we are right now. It's kind of, what is your expectation? How does it work here? Like, I see this with talent acquisition leaders a lot, where TA leaders, and you might have a lot of friends and colleagues who might have been in this situation, where the organization go, we want to be more progressive. Let's hire a progressive head of TA. So they hire someone from a cool company they want to be like. Yeah. They bring them in. That person, they go, do what you did there, here. And the person goes, great, I want to do this. Oh, no, we can't do that. All right, what about this? Oh, no, we won't give you budget for that. And you're kind of like, well, it's like, but just go make it like it was over there.
Yeah.
Scale that down to everybody. It's like adaptability is two ways. It's like, okay, are we willing to change the way we work, how we think about people? And back to I think the Agile piece isn't just about agility, right? That's one part of it, but I think it is a bigger organizational structure. And Josh Bersin talks about this a lot. Where he talks about the trend to kind of break down organizational structures, that the kind of more team oriented, you start a team, you end a team, you might be working in 4 or 5 teams at any one time. This is really important because it teaches you that you can, rather than having a linear role where you just, complete your task week to week and report to your boss, you tend to work on different projects with different people, and the projects come to a natural end. You start other projects, you've parallel projects running, and it just becomes very normal to work in this environment. So, if change comes and hits you like a brick, it's just about, okay, what projects are we going to put together to get used to this change? If I've done the same job for 20 years and then change comes along and it's like, well, okay, let's start doing different things. I have never done anything but this one thing. Versus the kind of,
you struggle at that point. So if you think about how careers are developing these days, tenure in role is, what's average tenure these days? Something tiny like 12 or 18 months, Johnny. So people are moving roles, people are making lateral moves, people are actively seeking how they develop their careers differently to what the traditional world was, kind of 10, 20 years ago. So all of that really creates the need to be adaptable and have environments and cultures that harness that rather than work against it. So, my last year in King, we were doing a big piece of work around what does the future of work look like, and how do you really lean into that and optimize it as a talent attractor. Bearing in mind, that's a big piece of where, what talent wants, how talent wants to develop their career. They want opportunity that looks like that as well going forward.
Yeah, I echo Eugene's sentiments there about a system who is not ready will push out bright minds. Farouk's offering you some more good advice. I think it's a really nice nugget here. If you remember, Farouk was commenting a few minutes ago and is an Agile coach himself. You can help someone on the team with proper strategy, how to adopt growth mindset, involve them in problem solving, and allow the team player to use his or her own imagination to solve these problems. This will give them a good start towards growth mindset. I think that's a really excellent point. It's like trusting people, it's getting them involved. It's a cultural mindset on how you run a project, how you get people involved in different projects. That has to be at the core of the business or the leader, I think.
It's creating the environment, Johnny, and I think if you can create the environment that people can try these things, so again, going back to, enabling them to take a risk and fail, no consequences because of it, actively encouraging that, for me, are all the types of things we should be doing in terms of kind of, looking to help adaptability flourish, basically.
So Becks, abstract question for you for a second. What's your knowledge of Pixar movies like?
A little, not too bad.
How about Ratatouille? Have you seen Ratatouille?
I have indeed, yes, absolutely.
Ratatouille, incidentally, is the highest critic-rated Pixar movie ever on IMDb, but not one of the most profitable. I'm in the Ratatouille school of thought on this. I believe anyone can cook, right? To take the line from Ratatouille. And I believe, and maybe it's more an aspiration, but I do believe that you can teach anybody anything. it is possible. It's sometimes really hard, but it's possible. So I believe that these things can be taught to anybody. You can turn anyone around, right, into more of a growth mindset and to be more adaptable. What are your thoughts? Is it something that you can teach anyone?
I think you need to want to do it, Johnny. So I'm with you. So, how many debates have I had over the years about I need a recruiter that must have recruited finance people to be a finance recruiter? No, I don't. I need a great recruiter. A great recruiter can find anybody, basically. But for me, I think you have to have the right attitude and you have to have the right mindset. So you have to want to do it. I think if you don't want to do it, they're on a hide into nothing, we're on a hide into nothing. So I think for me, it goes back to there has to be that balance of mindset as well as capability to learn it.
And there's a great example here let me just dig it out here from earlier on. So Eugene Brockman asked any thoughts on new jobs that are going to come out of the low-touch economy and how old roles can pivot. He gives the example of Uber drivers shifting to concierges for old people or at-risk people. I think it's a great example because you have somebody who doesn't have a hierarchical structure where there's a team or a company encouraging them to do different things. Although, to be fair to Uber, they've put in technology in the apps for drivers that I believe that helps find them jobs or other ways to use their skills, which actually was a really good innovation. But that aside, these are people who it seems who have just the right mindset. They're going, all right, rather than just stick at home and complain. A lot of us think taxi drivers and cab drivers.
What can I do?
What can I do?
What can I do? I see stuff come through LinkedIn on a daily basis around I'm on furlough at the moment, I'm developing this, or I'm doing this, or can I help you with that? All of those things for me are absolutely examples of what we're talking about. It's kind of, getting out there, doing something, having that right mindset.
But isn't about, the point of one of the articles earlier on where you go, this North Star purpose. I agree with you that you have to have the right motivation and want to do it. But I think if you show somebody the North Star, that's how you start by turning them around. I think you have to get that alignment, and you have to sell and clearly define that purpose. So, for example, if you're an Uber driver, it's like, no, you're not an Uber driver. You move people around. Can I go like, your job is to move people around. Who needs moving right now? They go, oh yeah, this person needs moving around. All of a sudden you go, I can still move people around. I know people who need to be moved. Let me go find them. And that is again, I think you could tell an Uber driver who otherwise going, I have no work. There's nobody wants an Uber. It's like, well, do people need to be moved around?
Yeah.
And they need to be moved around in a slightly different way. Could you basically put plastic screens up? Could you do something else? What is the way that you can help that? There's an opportunity there. It's just not seeing yourself in a rigid, I do this. Right? No, you don't. You do that, but it's in service of something bigger. Get in touch with your purpose.
Could you do it? How else could you do it? And I think for me, again, it comes back to, I think you fundamentally have to believe in that purpose. So if you haven't got alignment to that purpose, if that's not quite right or it's off, again, I don't think you can ever truly succeed in that. I think you have to wholeheartedly believe in that overall purpose, Johnny.
You do. By the way, shout out to Gary Murphy who chimed in that he also discovered the joys of gone off food during COVID as well. So he's in my book, in my camp there. We're enjoying much more food, Gary, me and you, with best before dates that we're willing to just squander and go, we don't care for those best before dates. So I'm going to bring it maybe to a bit of a conclusion on this, Becks, right? So if we're talking about adaptability, right? How much of an essential survival skill is this? What would your tips be then to someone for twofold tips to somebody trying to hire for adaptability? Somebody on this call who's responsible for hiring in their organization or part of the process. What would you say to them in terms of trying to identify and bring in people who are more adaptable? And then to those of us who are kind of wanting to be more adaptable, what would you say to that would maybe help us become more adaptable? So maybe two parts to that question.
Okay, so if I take your first question around tips for hiring for adaptability, I think as we talked about, it's there are a number of things that go into making up adaptability. So for me, it's about how do you dig behind those different items, Johnny, through your selection process and really building that picture. So not just looking at how somebody learns or looking and kind of pushing how somebody's resilient, but build that picture of those different facets that really go into making up somebody that's successful at being adaptable. And I think that would certainly be the first key. I think there was a second question for me.
So it's then, for individuals who just want to be more adaptable, what are your recommendations? What are your tips for someone who wants to who's kind of going, they have the attitude, I want to do this. What are your recommendations as to become a more adaptable professional? And there was a comment earlier on, for example, that said, one of the listeners' beliefs that working in a highly specialized role maybe is the wrong way around. It's maybe not the future. So what would your advice to somebody who's going, I agree with this need to be more adaptable in the future. What should I do, Becks?
I think if you've the desire, Johnny, you have to look for the opportunity. So, push yourself forward, stick your nose into something that gives you the opportunity to, to really kind of test it and put yourself through it. I think that would be kind of very, very simple advice I'd give. Don't sit and wait. You do something.
Would you recommend eating gone off food?
You're still alive, Johnny. So
hasn't killed me yet. Hasn't killed me yet.
Still alive, yeah.
And thanks to Bree Walsh. Bree Walsh just pointing out tenacity, another one of those skills. I think you're right. It's not about I think that's a really key insight. I hadn't thought about this before this call today, Beck. So thanks for giving this to me. It isn't about a thing called adaptability that you're hiring for. The adaptability is a family of skills that you need to recruit for, and probably in different ratios depending on the organization where you are in your journey on this. But it's how do you figure out how to assess for the family of skills that make up adaptability? Go assess for those things like tenacity, things like resilience, things like being able to cope with with criticism and so on and so forth. These are all things to be creative, to speak up. These are all part and parcel of the thing that we call adaptability, which I think is the bigger picture. Chris Jennings, by the way, just commenting, as recruiters and hiring managers, we need to discover multiple motivations in that person to ensure continuous adaptability, which I think is a great point. So I think the other layer I got from this today, Bex, is very much the piece around purpose, the North Star, as you say. It's about core basic skills. It's having the North Star, which maybe it's your organization's job to focus you on that North Star. And it's a two-way street. You got to go into an environment. You got to go into fertile soil. You got to be the right seeds potentially, but you got to go into fertile soil. That's really, really important. No, so Bex, one last question for you. I need your general advice, right? So we ask every guest on the show to give us their one piece of advice, either that you've ever been given that you want to share, or that you would give to anyone in the talent space who's listening here today. What's your one piece of advice? The piece of advice that Becks Clarke wants everyone to remember at the end of this.
Oh, so the Becks Clarke gem of advice is as follows. We are in a really privileged position in talent roles to help people realize their careers, Johnny. And I always look at that as a privilege. So, for me, I think that the key piece of advice is always remember you are dealing with human beings. And I know that sounds simple, but I think often it gets forgotten. So those human beings have feelings, they have emotions, they have highs, they have lows. Everybody's going through an incredibly tough time at the moment. Both yourself and the individuals that you're working with. So I think, my advice is never forget and never kind of forget to put on your hat that you're dealing with an individual at the end of the day and what's important to them. So, I think that would be my key piece of advice. And I think my key learning is actually having gone through and been a candidate in different candidate experiences as well. I think those have been things that have taught me massive lessons that I've then taken with me through my career in terms of, how do you work with the talent in your mix?
It's the empathy piece. It's so important to walk in someone else's shoes. Remember that not everyone thinks like you, acts like you, is in the same situation as you. Try and put yourself in their shoes before you take action, before you do stuff. It's brilliant advice, Becks. Thanks for sharing with us, and thanks for being on the show this week. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully we get you back and we can have another conversation and move on to different themes.
Oh, let's do another topic, Johnny. Yeah.
Please. And thanks to the audience for joining us with amazing chat and comments. And a shout out to my 11-year-old son who's been just recently joining in the comments. So hello, Aaron, Unbuilt Arc on YouTube, who's been saying hello as well. Proud to have my son listening in, one of my 4 sons listening in to us today. Folks, you don't forget, you can check out You can check out any of our shows and subscribe to get an update for new shows coming by going to socialtalent.com/the shortlist. Next week, we've got another fantastic topic I'm hoping you can join us for. We're going to be running an hour earlier than normal next week, though, so that's one slight change. So that's 3 p.m. UK Ireland time. So that is actually going to be 10 a.m. on the east coast of the US and 7 a.m. on the west coast, 10 p.m. Singapore time. And that's because we had a fantastic guest, a good friend of mine for the last, 6, 7, or 8 years, Jan Ackerman, who is the VP of Global Talent Acquisition for Oracle. So someone who's responsible for tens of thousands of hires every year. And Jan is going to be joining us to talk about what I'm seeing as a trend across all large organizations since the pandemic, which is a renewed focus on internal career mobility. How to basically not just keep looking outside our firms for new hires, but looking internally to see who do we have, and maybe we can move more of our team around, give them new opportunities, new training opportunities. What does that look like? And to share the story of what Oracle and particularly Jan's team have been doing around that. So don't forget to join us at 3 p.m. UK Ireland time, which is 10 a.m. on the east coast of the US, 7 a.m. on the west coast, to basically get that as well. And John saying thank you guys, lots learned. And lots of thanks coming in from loads of people. Really appreciate that from everyone. So don't forget to check out our full list and lineup on socialtalent.com/the shortlist. We'll be back not the same time, an hour earlier next week on Wednesday, the 15th of July. Until then, thanks for listening. Really hope you enjoy the show. I really hope you have a growth mindset and are more committed to being adaptable.